Okay. So this is my biofuel project on ethanol. My name is Lily Conan. So for my introduction and background, ethanol is a clear liquid that is a renewable fuel composed of an arrangement of plant-originating materials such as corn and plant mass. Mostly originates from corn, more specifically the starch found within it, and it is used in combination with gasoline to produce a more carbon, or I'm sorry, to reduce chemical emissions such as carbon. And as I previously mentioned, it is used as a healthier alternative to other fossil fuels. So, how is it cultivated? There are two main methods of ethanol production, which are starch and cellulosic. So, starch is the majority of ethanol production. This makes up for around 85% of ethanol production. So, this begins by milling corn into cornmeal, which is a majority composition of starch, then adding water to it to catalyze the reaction and break down the starch molecules, then forming glucose with the help of the enzyme glucoamylase. Then the glucose is fermented, distilled, and finally denatured by adding a small amount of gasoline, and then it is ready to be produced as the ethanol that we all know. Now, the more experimental and the newer form of ethanol production is called cellulosics. There are two forms of this. There's the biochemical one, which is the plant mass. So, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention for cellulosic, it is not corn that is used. It's not the starch found within corn. It is different types of plant bits, such as branches, leaves, things like that, known as plant mass. So, that is what's going to be used in the cellulosic form. So, biochemically, the plant mass is pre-treated by steeping in acid and then decomposing that into sugars. Then the plant mass is fermented, separated by what is alcohol and what is not, and then alcohol goes through distillation. Then the other form of cellulosic is thermochemical. So the plant mass is first dried and then converted into a gas called syngas. The gas is cleaned to form pure CO and H2, which are then compressed and separated into ethanol or hydrocarbons. And hydrocarbons are actually a very helpful byproduct, which I will touch on later. So the developmental status of ethanol, it is past the developmental stage for the most part, at least in the starch production, and it is one of the most popular biofuels in the U.S. Right now. So a majority of gasoline contains some percentage of ethanol. That is how popular it is within the country. This is due to the high oxygen content found within it, so that allows cars to burn fuel more efficiently and causing it to be in very high demand. So the second generation, known as 2GE or cellulosic, which is the other cultivation method that I mentioned in the last slide, is still in the more developmental stages and is being looked at as a more cost-effective version. So the impact on the carbon footprint of ethanol. So some sources in my research I found did debate the overall effectiveness on cutting out carbon emissions. The majority found that it is helpful, as shown in this graph right here. It is among the lower CO2 emission fuels. So there was found to be a 23% reduction in carbon intensity, also known as CI, since its introduction in the fuel industry. And it can cause up to a 29% reduction in carbon emission per mile in certain cars. One negative impact, though, is that it can sometimes produce more pollution while cultivating it than it cuts down in its use. But other than that, it has a more net positive effect on the carbon footprint. So for the economic impacts, there are both pros and cons, as you can see on the slide here. So first of all, the positive side of it, it has helped to create over 75,000 new jobs in the U.S. alone. That was reported in 2022. I'm not sure what it is to date today, but that's for last year. In addition, it has also generated approximately 35 billion in household income, along with 57 billion in contribution to the GDP. And it also brings economic stimulation to rural areas that otherwise would not really have much of a financial impact on the United States. However, some of the negative impacts, it is a less effective fuel than gasoline, so more of it must be produced, and therefore it does require a large amount of crop space in farms, as 40% of corn production are dedicated solely to ethanol. And this also did cause the price of corn per bushel to increase almost threefold in the past few decades. And with this, it is a costly thing to produce. It led to a 45-cent subsidy per gallon produced of ethanol. So, efforts to communicate ethanol to the public. So, despite it being present in a majority of gas stations, the efforts to communicate this to the public have not been super great. They've been pretty mediocre. There are certain organizations that do help to promote knowledge of this, such as the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, and there have been certain projects to promote healthier fuel alternatives like ethanol. But overall, most of the dialogue about it has been in politics, and that is just basically debating whether or not it is worth it economically to balance out the positive carbon efficient outputs. So here's my analysis. I did do a lot of research on ethanol for this project, and I did find both positive and negative aspects to it, but I do believe that the good outweighs the bad, and it is a very much more efficient alternative to other fuel sources. And here's my reasoning for that. The decrease in carbon emissions are so invaluable long term, and obviously, our planet needs to cut down on carbon emissions, and this will be helpful for our economy long term. In addition to talking about the economy even more, it does provide jobs and stimulates economic growth in areas that otherwise would not have any. It increases the lifespan of cars, and this would lessen the need for production for more vehicles. And in addition, as I mentioned in I believe the second slide, it does produce useful byproducts of CO2, which is used in creating freezing agents and dry ice production, and DDGs, dried distillers grains that cut down on the large crop areas, or I'm sorry, the large area that certain crops take up in storage. So, my proposal, the main point of this is to increase communication to the public, especially the youth population, as these will be the people who are going to be developing and cultivating these things within the near future. And I think that this is really important to communicate this to younger people and get them involved. So also, in addition to this, I think that we should be researching ways to cut down pollution in the production of ethanol, because this is one of the big negative aspects to it. So I think that if we are able to cut down the pollution in its production, then honestly, there wouldn't really be much of a downside to it at all. And also, one more thing, I think that we should be researching other starch-based crops similar to corn that would be more economically feasible and would not take up the same surface area or cost. So I know that there are certain crops out there that have similar properties to corn and similar costs. So I think that researching ways that we could incorporate these crops into making other biofuels would be very helpful. So here are my resources, and that is everything. Thank you.